Hi everybody, welcome back to Medieval Monday. So I said last time that I was going to talk a little bit about the Wills of Ventores project and the ways in which I was planning on using a database to sort of record the various aspects of the wills. So I've recorded a screenshot of kind of showing how I'm setting things up, sort of my underlying principle. As I mentioned there, I'm much more interested in relationships than I am in recording the text entirely as written. And I'm not particularly interested in transcription at the moment because the plays are, or not the plays, the wills are all pretty much encapsulated in this book, which is obviously under copyright. And so I'm not going to try to break copyright by transcribing it. Other stuff that has been going on, I have been invited to write a blog post for Digital Medievalist, which I'm going to do on the topic of database as method, I think, as opposed to tool. So you'll see a little bit of what I mean in that in the video here. But really, I'm trying to think of it as a way to think through problems as opposed to I just want to get this information in a form that I can then utilize to build charts and graphs or graft onto my blog or something like that. The Folger class I was taking has completed. We spent the last class session filming short videos of all the participants, explaining why they're interested in medieval drama. So I'm in the process of mixing the sound on those. And then I'm going to go ahead and send them over to a friend of mine who's from the class, Heather Mitchell-Buck, who's going to do the work of mixing it all down to something that's probably a little bit more exciting than the videos I tend to give out, which is basically me talking to the camera. So once that is set up and it's been shared, I'm going to go ahead and link to it here. I think it's probably going to be shared on her YouTube account because she'll have the final product, and I'll just have all my section of the building blocks. And then I'll show you guys what we came up with. The other thing we're doing is we're in the process of building out the medieval drama section of the Folger's internal Wikipedia project, Folgerpedia. And I think I mentioned this already, but I'm involved with the staging aspects of things. So expect in the next couple weeks me to talk about that some. And then I'm also working on the paper I'm going to be giving at Kalamazoo, which is sort of an evolution from the paper I gave at the Sewanee conference, which you've already heard. So I'll probably do the same thing. I'll record the questions and comments. I probably won't record myself giving the presentation, and I won't video it because that's just way too obtrusive. But I will put it up alongside with my slides probably sometime after Kalamazoo. Other things that I have going on, I had an interview for a position as a visiting assistant professor in teaching medieval lit as opposed to what I'm doing right now, which is much more digitally focused. I don't know how that went. I felt pretty good coming out of the interview, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're the top dog in sort of the ranking chart, as it were. They're supposed to be getting back to me relatively quickly, so maybe by the time I put this up, I'll have different news and I'll put it down in the description. If I don't, I'll mention it next video. And then one thing I want to also stress is feel free to ask questions, and that I realize that these videos are not I don't have the big flashing, I don't have the Mentos and Diet Coke, I don't have the big blocky graphics, I don't have the click here and all that stuff. I'm just not temperamentally designed for that, to be honest with you guys. I'm much more designed to try to explain things, and my sense of humor tends to be a little bit drier than all that. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and switch things over here in a second to the screenshots, and then I'll be back at the end with a little bit more information, and then that'll be that. So see you in a bit. Okay, so as I mentioned in the opening spiel, my goal for today is really to kind of walk you guys through the ways that I use databases to try to help think through semi-regularized texts like wills, plays in some ways, anything where there's a relationship as opposed to just straight text. And I'm using a MySQL database to do this for a couple of reasons. First off, MySQL's free. And secondly, for me personally, I used to, in another life, be a database administrator. I used to develop and build databases for small to mid-sized companies, and so I'm much more comfortable with using this as a tool than I am with some of the other things that are out there. And the third reason is that really the other option that tends to get used in the humanities is what's called a document-oriented database. And really the versions of the document-oriented database that get used are XML-based. So you might think Exist, for example, various flavors of what's called NoSQL. And I really haven't seen much reason to embrace this as a new database paradigm when I'm doing the kind of work that I'm attempting to do. The benefit really is that if you've already transcribed the text and you've encoded it in TEI, you can theoretically use a document-oriented database to search it quickly, pull up information, and develop it that way. Or in some ways, the XQuery programming language will do that as well. And really, if I was going to do that kind of work, I think I'd go with XQuery rather than trying to build it as a database model. Because in my experience, the Exist database tends to be very temperamental. It doesn't really do that much to speed things up. What you see when you see performance increases with that is you're seeing the ability to apply more horsepower. Because what it does do very well is it allows you to distribute documents across the web, because you're really pulling up a number of individualized MySQL documents with the database programming, building the index and such. That's my understanding of how it works anyway. Full disclosure, even though I did used to make a living at this stuff, I consider myself roughly the programming equivalent of the shade tree mechanic. I could tell you what's wrong. I might be able to tell you how to fix it. Some of the underlying theoretical stuff that you would get from a computer science person, I don't necessarily have. I was the person who got thrown at problems and hit my head against the wall until they were fixed, and that's why I have the skill set I have. So what we're doing here is we're building a SQL database, and the SQL database is going to handle all the information for wills in East Anglia. And I've already done that here, or at least I've started to do so here, but I want to take you through sort of the thought process before kind of showing you the finished product. So what we have is, you'll notice I'm quitting my mail program because I don't want it beeping while I'm out and about here. So we've got a number of things. Now you notice I have two windows open. This window is phpMyAdmin. This is pretty much the bare bones standard if you install a MySQL database. It's a web-based administrative tool. You can do everything in the command line. If there's enough interest, I'll show you guys how to do that. But I figure that for people who want to do this work, who are actually following this, they come in kind of two flavors. There are either people who are interested in medieval stuff, in which case they've tuned out already because there's nothing medieval about databases. Or there are people who are interested in my work and the kind of things I'm doing. And this is not, just say the command line is not the way I handle accessing MySQL databases. I do it through a GUI just because I don't want to deal with having to type in 8 million things. So the first thing to do is to take a look at your document. In this case, we are working with the Wills and Inventories book I showed last time, and you'll hear a little bit of noise, so I'm pulling it out. And a will or inventory, it comes in multiple flavors, obviously, but it has three primary parts. And the three primary parts are the will, the testament, and the probate. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by creating a new table. And this new table, I have another screen off to the side with my notes, so you'll have to bear with me here while it recognizes the fact that it didn't open where I wanted it to open. So this new table is going to have a number of fields in it. And this is similar to if you have a spreadsheet or something along those lines, kind of filling in, say, the column categories at the top. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to create a column called ID. And this column is going to be an int column, an integer column. Int and integer are roughly the same thing. Really what all that means is it's a lot of stuff about how large the actual number is allowed to be. Okay? And so we're going to make this the primary key. That's what this key here means. This symbol here means. And we're going to auto increment it. Now what this does is this creates a column that every time you add a new record, it will increment this number by 1, which means every single record of a document will have its own unique identifying number. And that's what gets used to sort of generate indices, to index databases and to move between things relatively quickly. So, and what we're going to do, as you'll see once I populate this a little bit, is we're going to use this to allow us to create connections between things relatively quickly. So the next thing you do is add a field, and this field we're going to call will. And what we're doing there, actually, let's go ahead and make it lowercase, will. And what we're going to do is this is going to be what's called a variable character file. And there's kind of multiple options as far as that goes. You could have it be a text file, small text, medium text, long text. You could have it be various numbers. It could be a character file. We're going to do variable character because it allows us to have a longer file length. So notice I'm leaving these blank. And they should jump to the default once I save. And the default for this, I believe, is 11. And the default for this, I think, is 255. Now, if you have a really large document, you can do what's called a blob, which is sort of just, here is a thing that has a lot of information in it. I'm just going to throw everything in there. Quite often, I'll use blob to generate notes. So we have the will. It's a variable character file. We have, oh shoot, I hit the wrong button. 1 second. We'll go back over here. Kill that. And we'll add a field. Okay, so testament. And a variable character again. Add a field. Probate. And variable character again. Okay, so what this does is what we've done is we've created a record that will give us for a unique identifier internally to the system for each will, testament, and probate. Now notice though that what we haven't done is we don't have any way to record who the person is, and we don't have any way to record whether they're the deceased, they're the executor of the will, or they're the somebody who is having something bequeathed to them. So, what we're going to do, and I just hit new again, I do that every single time on this program. We're going to add a field, and we're going to call it person_ID. And it's going to be an integer field. And what we are doing here, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we could put the person here, but what that does is, let me show you something. Okay, now I do want to create a new field, so I'm going to call this documents. And you'll notice in tables, now I have a documents table, and it did populate with 11s and 255s as we expected. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new field this time. I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to have an ID. The ID is going to be an integer. I'm going to make it the primary key. I'm going to auto increment it. And I'm going to add another field. And this field is going to be first name. And we're going to go ahead and do a variable character. And add another field. And this field is going to be called last name. And we're going to do another variable character. Alright, so what this does is this gives us a first and last name and ID for each individual person. And what you'll do is in your documents table, you'll notice that you have nothing in there right now, and that's fine. But this person ID will be this number, and that's the connection between the two tables. However, notice that if you want to create multiple ID or multiple relationship connections between people, so let's say for this document I want to record the person who passed away, I want to record the executor, I want to record the things that were the people who received bequests. I can't do that with this relationship because all this relationship does is connect a particular person to a particular document. And what that ends up doing is it creates sort of a one-to-one relationship. So the way around that, and we're going to very quickly go back to documents. So instead of being person ID, we are going to delete this table. Or not the table, excuse me, delete the field. Okay. All right, and we're going to create a new table. And this table, let's go ahead and save the one we've already got before I start creating 18 million new tables. All right, so this table is called people. You could call it persons. If I were going to do this professionally, I would probably call it persons because the ID in other tables is called person_ID, but I'm the only person I'm planning on using this, and I like grammar to be correct. So I'm calling it people. And so what we have here is we'll go ahead and create a new table. So tables, new table. Okay, so this table, and notice what it does is it puts everything in individual tabs. So I like that, generally speaking. I'm pulling them apart just so you can kind of see what's going on with this. So if I create an ID, and then that ID, again, is an integer, and it has a key, okay? And so we're going to add a field, and we're going to call this field document ID. Okay? So it's an integer again. So now what we've done is we've created a unique identifier, and we've said that we're attaching a document to it, and we are also attaching a person to it. All right? So what this does is this is the table that would actually end up being at the heart of the actual database. This is a table of relationships. Okay? So you have a particular document could have a number of rows attached to it, connecting it to a number of different people. And those individual people might have things like, let me go up here and I'll show you one I've already got working. So it might have things like document ID, person ID, as we see, action ID. So actions. So that might be things like executor or gave or bequeathed. You have, well, role would be more like something more like the executor of the will. An action might be something where it's being given to somebody or being donated. And then you also have, I have up here location and parish and things like that because I want to locate these wills within particular parishes and where those parishes are located within both the medieval and modern maps of England. And so the goal with all of this, to give you a sense of things, if I pull up the document here, let me see. You'll see that I have, and I'll actually just go ahead and show you the design as opposed to, all right, I have a number of different things. So I have the ID, I have the probate number, that's the internal identifier. I have the primary language and secondary language, that lets me know whether it's in Latin or English. I have the testament, will, and probate, so what I will do is I will insert the actual text of the testament, will, and probate from the will in those sections. And then I have the ability with this connections table to show you the ways in which the various elements connect to each other. And what that does is it allows me to really start to connect the various individuals to each other, start building out that network I talked about. And doing it by mapping not so much worrying about the text itself as a sacrosanct object, but mapping the relationships that are going on within the text. And I think if you can do this, what it will allow me to do is to see that relationship I talked about last time and a little bit at the beginning, where it's somebody who is bequeathing something to an executor with the understanding the executor will perform a religious service, essentially will pray for their soul that they've passed away. When that executor passes away, they in turn go and end up passing on that obligation to somebody else. And I want to see how deep this web actually goes and how it connects not just people, but connects people to locations, to communities, to physical structures, to objects. You know, there are wills where tapestries have been donated. For example, the will of Cicely Neville, who was the mother of Richard III, the wife of Richard, Duke of York. In her will, she gives a couple of tapestries to Prince Henry of Wales, who ends up being Henry VIII because his brother Arthur passes away. And why I think that's interesting is because the tapestries are described with the visual depictions. But we also know that there were poems written intended to be woven onto these tapestries. So one of the things that Henry is given is a St. George tapestry. Another thing he's given is, I forget what the second one is. I want to say it's Mary Magdalene, but that's because I have Mary Magdalene on the brain, so don't trust me on that. I'll double check and put it in the description if I'm right or not. But what that does is it makes me wonder if these tapestries had more than just the images on them, if they had an image and associated text. And that associated text might have been poems by John Lydgate or some of the other poets that I've been working with. And if that's the case, it suggests a vector for influence of the ideas that these poems contain that isn't just embodied in the codex, embodied in parchment. much in the same way that the wall inscriptions and such that I've been talking about suggest a way of thinking that moves beyond just the linear devotionary culture. And so I think what's happened is we're only getting a little piece of the whole puzzle. And my hope is that, and I realize it probably isn't very exciting looking at me talking over a blank screen, so I'll switch back to the camera here in a second. My hope is that if I can show this, that I can start plugging in some of the actual text we do have to it and start mapping this culture as a larger whole. So that's kind of my game plan. So the reason why I want to record the parishes and such, for example, is because there's a number of them. So that's a map of all the parishes in Bury St. Edmunds. Not Bury St. Edmunds, but the Archdeaconry of Sudbury. And the other reason I want to go ahead and do that, I'm sorry I keep looking over because I can't always see everything, is the other thing I need to do is record the various types of requests and stuff. So all the information is here in this book. It's an excellent introduction. So I don't feel the need to really repeat the wheel, and try to somehow supersede Peter Northeast's work. All I want to do is I want to use this as the basis to start to chart relationships between people. And so, the database makes it easier to do that in ways that I just can't reading this book. So that's really my goal with the whole thing. And as you saw, the entire model is really based on the connections between those ID numbers that the indexes are being built on. And it's all designed to map relationships. One of the things that often gets mentioned about relational databases can't map one to many. That's not true. It takes it takes an extra step. You have to have what's called a lookup table, which is what that table with all the IDs is, to do that work. And I think a lot of what happens in the humanities about technology is people getting really excited about new things. This is new and exciting, so I want to make sure I do this so that I look like I'm doing cutting edge scholarship. Or it's driven by collaboration with libraries. And collaboration with libraries are an excellent thing. They need to happen more, and librarians need to be brought in as equal partners. And the information provided, the WUFI, to use the term from Down Mountain Magic Kingdom, Cory Doctorow's book. There needs to be different types of WUFI for different people. Like the professors get their publications, their articles. Librarians have their own publications and their articles, their writing. But I think what happens is because librarians have had to pick up on this stuff. Their stock in trade is really information. It's finding things. I think quite often finding things becomes the be all end all, and doing other things like I'm trying to do with charting relationships, or with the plays database I have, where I'm not trying to find a particular line quickly, although I can do that. I'm just trying to chart the relationships between actors, lines, and locations. It tends to get kind of put to the sidelines or become secondary. And that's not always a bad thing. It just requires the person who is doing the work, who is writing on the tool, to recognize that the tool was originally written, or the platform was originally written for one purpose, and is being utilized for a different one. And that doesn't always happen. And what I'm hoping I can do by this short video, just showing you guys in that very truncated sort of way, my thought process in starting to put this kind of database together is I'm hoping I can show you, first off, that there's a different model than just we need to find something really quickly, so let's throw as much horsepower at it as we possibly can. And secondly, to realize that it's not enough just to build a tool. You need to be able to articulate to people what that tool is doing for you and why. So what this is going to do for me is a couple things. First off, it's gonna let me chart the relationships between parishioners, their executors, churches, that sort of thing, much more easily than I can just going through the Northeast book. The other thing it's going to do, hopefully, is articulate what I see as really a best practice in sort of this intersection between medieval studies and digital scholarship, is the ability to not just build the tool, but explain why the tool has to be built the way it has to be built, what it's doing, what you're achieving by doing it. And then from there, somebody who gets this database, because it will be freely available, there's no reason why it shouldn't be. Like I said, my intention is not to transcribe word for word what's in Northeast, and the Northeast book doesn't necessarily fully transcribe all of the wills and inventories anyway. But what it will do is it will provide a model to say, it's not just enough to build something. We have this whiz-bang digital tool. You need to be able to explain to people what's under the surface. The thought processes that went into building out the particular tool. And that's not always going to fall upon the individual researcher. That's sometimes going to fall upon librarians. It's sometimes going to fall upon graduate students. It's sometimes going to fall upon people in computer science. And they need to be able to explain it in a way that somebody who is not part of their particular specialization can get. And they need to be able to explain it in a way that allows me to decide whether or not this tool or this database or this methodology is going to work for me. There's a concept called the black box, which I'm sure I've mentioned before and I'm sure you've heard of, where information comes in one end, the product of that information pops out the other end, and you have no idea what's going on inside the box itself. So part of the process of this video and other videos on this particular methodology that I'll talk about later is to be able to kind of take the lid off that black box and let you see everything that's going on the inside as far as I'm concerned. And recognizing that my way of doing things is not the only way of doing things. It's not necessarily the right way of doing things. I don't think there is a quote-unquote right way of doing things. There's the way of doing things that makes the most sense for the particular project that you are working on. And what has happened is we have gotten so worried about the costs in manpower of developing these tools and these platforms and these infrastructures that we have become really wedded to the idea that they are the best way of doing things, when they aren't. They are a way of doing things, and they may be the best way of doing things for particular problems. But the issue where I get worried about it, and I realize this is rapidly turning into a screed, and I'll be quiet after this and let you guys quit watching this video. Where I worry about it is when people don't have that extra bit to understand the thought process behind everything. And so they grab this tool, and this tool has an entire intellectual apparatus built around it that is hidden, that's a black box. And that black box becomes a sort of bounding box for scholarship. Those of you who are academics, Baudrillard's idea doxa. The idea that there's certain habits and expectations about the world that are just there and aren't even thought about or acknowledged, at the bounding box of heterodoxy and orthodoxy, of their accepted practice. It has affordances of what I've called the conceptual scripture with religious stuff, but these black boxes are becoming that sort of bounding box for our ability to use technical tools. And there's all sorts of pressures that are causing this to occur that we are not actually privy to, that we aren't actually thinking of. And if I can, in any small way, through sort of trying to explain my work, push back against that and leave a little space for, I refer to myself as a shade tree mechanic as far as programming goes, but the shade tree mechanics of the world, to do things that are a little different than the standard orthodoxy, or the heterodox opinion, or what, however you want to frame it. I think that's a worthwhile thing, and I think it's worth thinking about. So for next time, I'll talk a little bit about this project. I'm probably going to focus more on staging and the paper I'm going to be working on for Kalamazoo. And I have some articles that I've been backburnering that I need to get to work on. So I'll give you a little bit of information about those too. So have a good week or 2 weeks, and I'll see you then. Bye.